Java in this.
And I will start to let people in. Hello to everybody who is entering our space at the Avid Reader bookstore in our Zoom land, and welcome to Avid Reader. It has been a slightly blustery evening this evening, but it's lovely to see you all here. So if you imagine the old world we used to live in, we would all be in a little light coat and huddled together on the back deck at Avid Reader. But today it's nice to see you all arriving in the Zoom room. So I'm just admitting some more people before we start the event. So just as I'm admitting some more people, I will let people know that you will be on mute for the entire event tonight, but there is a chat function, and that chat function you'll find at the bottom of your screen generally. And while we're waiting, you can have a look for that, because that's where you can ask questions. And those questions will come directly to me. And when I have your questions, I'll be able to pass them along at the end of the event to Robert. So do think of those questions, and whenever you think of them, put them into that chat function and I will be able to pass them on at the end. Now, no doubt more people will be arriving soon, but I will just start the preamble and let people in as they arrive. So I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on. In this area, the Turrbal and the Yagara people, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I'd also like to acknowledge that because this is Zoom, we are zooming out onto the lands of many different Aboriginal people all around Australia. And I would like to pay my deepest respects to all of the elders of all the places that we end up appearing tonight. So this always was and always will be Aboriginal land, and sovereignty was never ceded. Now, it's my pleasure to host this event tonight. We're Zooming both to another place in Queensland, but also to Tasmania to invite Robert Dessaix. And we are celebrating the launch of his newest book. And to show you where the chat function is, where you can type your questions, I'm going to put a link to the book here, The Time of Our Lives. And to purchase that book, you just click on that link and there will be a 10% discount for the next 24 hours. So now and for 24 hours, if you use the code EVENT at the checkout, you will get a 10% discount on the book and also anything else that's in your cart. So that might be a little bit of an incentive to go and grab the book. And to remember that although you don't think it's Christmas yet, in bookseller land, it is well and truly Christmas. So do keep that in mind. And it's going to be a bit tricky getting books around the country later, closer to Christmas. So do think ahead is what I need to say. So now when I let one more person in, I'm going to go into my introductions. So I'd like to introduce our two speakers tonight. First, we have Robert Dessaix, who is best known as a writer of literary nonfiction and fiction, memoirs, essays, and autobiography. He's also published 2 novels, several short stories and a play. He has taught Russian language and literature and translated novels, poetry and plays from the original Russian. And Robert presented the Books and Writing show on the ABC RN for many years. He is best known for his books A Mother's Disgrace, Night Letters, Corfu, Twilight of Love, and What Days Are For. And his new book, The Time of Our Lives, On Growing Older Well, will rightfully take its place beside those master works. Robert Dessaix is coming to us from Hobart, Tasmania. And in conversation with Robert is the wonderful Kathleen Noonan, who is a journalist and columnist who's reported in South Africa, the UK and Australia for over 3 decades. She's worked as a senior features writer, sub-editor and section head with various newspapers. Kathleen is also the chair of Second Chance, which is the only charity in Australia that raises money exclusively for homeless women. It supports at-risk women and children in domestic violence shelters. That work is amazing. So thank you for joining us tonight, and I'll hand over to you now, Kathleen.
Thank you very much, Chrissy. Hello, Robert, and thank you for this book, Time of Our Lives. You can tell I've enjoyed it. It's dog-eared all the way. There's so many passengers in it I want to talk to you about. I read in the weekend papers there was an article about you, and the headline was "A Fine Old Age." And I want to ask you, do you feel old?
Very good question, actually, because we all mark old age off from middle age at a different point, I suppose. I think I do now feel old. But it's quite a recent feeling. Until very recently, I felt middle-aged. All of a sudden, in my late 70s, I think I feel old, but not elderly, not fragile, just old. It's Act 4 already. Act 4 has begun. Act 4 doesn't usually end very well, and I do understand that. But I want to have a fine Act 4. It's often the most memorable act in a good play.
You wrote that there's the idea of to grow well old, to age well. The idea is not to be childlike or childish, but a friend said to you, you're like a kid. Being a kid is part of the knack that you've got. What's the difference between being a kid and being a child when it comes to that sort of old age?
Well, she was crueler than that. What she said was, "You've never ever quite grown up, have you?" And she said that in front of 300 people. And I thought about it. I thought, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? Is that a gay thing? What sort of thing is it really? I suppose she's right in a way. And I think I'm pleased that I haven't quite grown up. I prefer kid to child because if I think of myself as childlike or childish, it means I'm in some way innocent. Yes, I like to play. I don't want to come inside when it's dinner time, but there's an innocence and unknowingness. I'm not unknowing, am I? I mean, if you've read my books, you know I'm not unknowing. I know things. I've been places, I've seen things. These eyes have seen a lot, actually. So I want another word. I want a word that says I love to play, that I can be a little irresponsible at times. And I think that kid, I'm being again, much more often than I should probably. I think for gay men it's much easier because we usually don't have 5 children and 1 living spouse and 1 ex-spouse. We can afford to be irresponsible. We can afford to keep on playing. And I suppose that's what I do. I play a lot. I do also nest and I rest and I do things for other people, but I love to play. I love to learn languages. I love to travel. I love to go to the theatre. I used to love to dance. So I think that's why I'm a kid again, doing what kids do.
So amongst your readers, I think there's a jealousy. There's a jealousy because there's not that huge obligation, as you said, children and looking to not do what you want to do and be a kid. So maybe we're living our lives vicariously through your behaviour.
Well, one copes with what one is given, and this is my way of coping. It won't be everybody's. And for some people, there's a better way of coping. This is my way. I'm an only child. I'm an adopted child. I don't have family. I have no family at all. I have a partner. It's a little different. But I have to find a way of coping with what I've got. Playing, as my father would have said, with the cards I find in my hand. And that's one of the ways I cope. That's why I'm a little bit surprised, as I say in the book, that so many gay people have decided they want to get married. It seems to me one of the great joys of being gay is that you don't have to do that. You can sing from your own songbook. And gay marriage, it seems to me, while I voted for people's right to choose it if they wish, it seems to me is taking you back into a world where people do have a lot of responsibilities. They have promises that they've made to other people. They have a different notion of how they fit into the body politic and into society. So that's what people are doing. I accept it, of course, but it does surprise me. I mean, a lot of my heterosexual friends are not married. They don't want to be married. Their children go to respectable private schools sometimes, or respectable state schools. They're not married, it turns out. Marriage is not something they want to sign up for. But I'm doing the best I can with what I've got.
When I think of the sort of, I've got 8 sort of people in my life, friends that are 80 and 90, and who I think are aging well. And there's something about that, there's an importance on getting away with stuff. You know, in their day, in their routine, there has to be some things that you can get away with. And whether it be, you know, your 4 drinks at night, or whether it be going to the pokies, or whether it's just not playing by the rules, having something in your life that you're getting away with.
Well, it's the great joy of being older, that at some level, and you probably won't like the expression, you simply don't care anymore. When you're young, you wonder what people are thinking about you. And then when you're middle-aged, you try to not care about the fact that some people won't like you, perhaps, or approve of you. When you're my age, you realize nobody's thinking about you at all. So it doesn't matter.
Liberating, is it?
You live the way that you want to live. It doesn't matter. You don't have to live up to anyone's expectations. If you want to read Shakespeare, read Shakespeare. If you want to read Harry Potter, read Harry Potter. Don't worry whether it's politically correct or not. You live in order to be happy, because that's what days are for. When you're younger, you have to shore up your defenses against the world. You have to work, you have to get a mortgage probably in our sort of society. You have to create a base from which to face the world. When you're my age, the great joy is that you don't anymore. You just don't. So I do what I want when I want to do it, without being rich. It's an inner freedom. And the joy of being older is, of course, rarely outer. It's almost always inner. The outer side can be a bit of a problem, but you must accept it. And so I do. It's the maintenance, you know. The maintenance takes up a lot of time once you get to a certain age. But inside, I am happier than I've ever been. And I have gone down more deeply into all the sorts of things that make up me, and all the sorts of cultures that have nourished me through life, more deeply, more narrowly, but more deeply. It's wonderful. I have no desire to be 24 again, or 34, or 44, or 54. There's just one problem about being my age, and that is that one dies fairly soon.
You described, I think when you were talking, you would describe that as having a sturdy mental core. You were sort of moving, you were thinking around the word, you were talking about the word soul, and then you dispersed with that and said, no, that's not the word I'm looking for. There'll be physical disintegration, but you were looking for what sustains you, and you said the sturdy mental core. Can you describe that a little bit more?
Yes, it's the inner self that is at the core of this book, actually. And for me, it's a kind of dance. It's choreographed. I don't think it's just that you like going to the odd concert, that you like having lunch with your friend Jamie on Fridays, or that you love dogs. It's a dance, it's choreographed, it has a shape, and it has roots. And the sooner you start dancing this dance, choreographing your inner landscape, or the performing it, I suppose I should say, the better. I mean, start when you're 4, start when you're 6. But if you haven't started already and you're 86, then start tomorrow morning. I suppose, what else can I say? It's a bit late, but start tomorrow morning. This is what sustains you. It sustains you at any age. But when you're young, you feel you can ignore that rather. And you're beautiful, you're handsome, you have a beautiful house, you cook well, you have glamorous friends. You can ignore this wonderful mixture of discipline and playfulness that makes up your inner world. Now, I avoid the word soul simply because I think it's been taken over largely, perhaps it was produced largely by a religious consciousness, which I don't develop or go into in this book. Really, it's not really me. I don't have that kind of Christian or Muslim or Jewish consciousness. So that's all to one side, really. And I looked for a different word I could use. I avoid the word spiritual for the same reason. I feel that that's a word that belongs to different narratives, really, from the one that I'm trying to tell. I want people to think to themselves, I'm going to think about this differently from this moment onwards. And I need some new words, some new phrases, some new vocabulary to do that. I try to offer some examples. But yes, it's a dance. And the first line of the book is about a dance. It's calisthenics in a hotel garden in Yogyakarta, in Java. People are dancing to Voulez-vous coucher avec moi, actually. Very sexy, quite erotic. And the last dance in the book, in the last line, where I do use the word soul, is Javanese classical dancing, danced by children, as a matter of fact, going deeply down into the Hindu heritage in Java, which predates Islamic culture.
You write lovingly about Java. Do you think they do aging better there, or do you think they do living better there, or is it something about the idea of the village life and being connected?
It's more that. No, I don't think they do many things better. I mean, I don't really. They do some things better. I think they do friendship better. I think they do masculinity better. I think there are more versions of masculinity open to men in that particular kind of society than are available in our sort of society, where the footballing prototype dominates more than it should really. I'm writing from a village. It's on the outskirts of Yogyakarta, for those of you who've been to Java and might know it's just south of Yogyakarta, between Yogyakarta and the sea. And there they do old age better. These are very poor people, but you are not sequestered, you're not isolated as an old person in some building with 100 other old people, which is a nightmare. Nobody wants to be locked up with 100 old people. Why do they do it to us? Well, we know why they do it to us, and this doesn't apply in Java. They do it to us because in that way, you can make old age into an industry. You can make it pay its way. In our sort of society, Western society, if you want to use shorthand, you have to pay your way. When Tony Abbott, I think it was, quite recently said, well, maybe we should consider letting old people just die. He said, maybe we should consider letting nature take its course. What he meant was they're not being productive. And this is a society that needs people to be productive. Well, old people's homes, aged care facilities, keep older people productive. They keep on paying large sums of money, actually, in order to be old and in order to die in certain surroundings. In Java, they don't. They sit on the front veranda and look at the street or talk to the people walking past, perhaps do a little bit of work inside, do some cooking, wander around the streets, sit and watch people working in the rice paddies. It's different. And I think the word village is very important for us in thinking about how we might do this in the future, how we might find ways for older people to live in a caring environment, an environment where people are keeping an eye out for them. Think of the village. Of course, many of these facilities call themselves villages. And Peter's mother, the woman who dies in the course of this book, and that is actually what happened. She lived in a village. It wasn't a village. It was a whole lot of apartments full of old people who bored each other to death and went on excursions to things they didn't really want to see every second Tuesday and played mahjong on Fridays. Who wants to live like that? Nobody, I would say to you. Nobody wants to live like that. We want to live with 3-year-olds and 48-year-olds and gay people and straight people and women and men and people who've worked in the theatre and people who've driven trucks. We want to live in a village.
When I was reading that passage, I was thinking, they say it takes a village to raise a child. I think it takes a village for people to age well, because it takes You know, it's about that. It's about the butcher who's friendly. It's about the barista who, you know, you see in the morning. It's about your ritual. It's about, yeah. I find it really interesting. Your focus in this book. You start off. Your jumping off point, of course, is you spend time in that nursing home with your partner's mother, and so you're seeing that being played out. And the book comes at such an interesting time because Australians, baby boomers, have all sat through COVID, seeing the weaknesses of our aged care system being revealed. And all the boomers are saying, well, there's no way I'm going into aged care. But that's pretending that in all circumstances we have a choice.
I know, of course, we don't. All I can say, for example, in my case, is to say to my partner, I really want to die here in my house where I'm about, 10 feet from the path, from the footpath in front of the house, where I can watch the world go by, where the shops and the cafes are not far away from the house, where I can get down to the street without going down steps. But it may not be up to me in the end. I do understand that. You know, that's but I thought that it was a good idea to write this book from a different perspective. If I'd written it from Hobart, the conversations, because it's a collection of conversations with women, really, isn't it? If they'd all taken place in Australia or in Hobart, there would have been a sort of acceptance of what was right and what was wrong and what was the sensible way to do things. By starting in Java, everything is so alien. The religion is, of course, so alien. And religion is important at every level of that society. Everyone's thought goes to religion many times a day, to notions of how they fit into the world and into eternity and into society. And so it just shook me up.
Yes. Well, I've been, this year in particular, I've been sort of helping look after my father, who's in his 90s, staying at home on the farm. And a couple of things have really hit me. Watching it close up is the important thing in his life, is one of the important things in his life are conversations. He craves stimulating conversation.
But few of us know how to converse. I think it's absolutely true. And less do we know how to converse. I, in fact, have written about it quite a lot over the years, because for me, friendship and conversation, which are two aspects of the same thing, after all, these are meandering things with different shallownesses and depths and borders and permissions and things that are forbidden. Conversation is what you live for. Really, it's what I live for. They're an aspect of friendship. They go together, but I wake up in the morning wondering who I will be talking with. But there is a problem, I think, in our society, and I don't want to label all men. I don't want to paint them all with the one brush, as it were. But I think that there is a gender consideration here, that many men find it hard to simply allow what is going on in their heart and their mind to be seen and read and discussed by outsiders. I think that men are very conscious of their emotional vulnerabilities in a way that some women, well, are not or are braver about, which is why most of the people I talk to in this book are women, because women will not only answer my questions when I ask them, what are you afraid of? How are you dealing with this fear? What is good in your life? What is better than has ever been? They will say to me, and what about you? That's a very feminine response. What about you? What are you afraid of? Why are you afraid of that? And that is what conversation, good conversation, is made up of. It's friendship in words. That's all it is. And it's the most wonderful thing in the universe, and it always has been.
Yes, yeah, we can lift you. You, at one point, you are you're in the nursing home. You've seen Rita. You've come out, and you're in the garden, and yet you say that you say I'm not unhappy at the moment, and I think I have a knack for being happy. That optimism I find really intriguing. When most people, you know, that's what they're craving for. You've got a passage that particularly is about happiness in the book, about your knack of being happy. Would you be able to read a small part of that for us, Robin?
Yes, just let me quickly find it. I put on my reading glasses. I'm afraid I say almost as badly through my reading glasses as I do when I haven't got them on. This is quite a short passage. I've just been with Rita. Rita is evaporating. The person that I've known is disappearing in front of my eyes and dies in another chapter in the book. But I've gone out to the back garden and I say, why, I wonder, am I not unhappy? Ashamed, though I am to admit it, I suspect I have a secret knack for a kind of communal garden variety happiness. Or at least for holding on to it when it strikes, not for jubilation, which is something I lack all talent for, nor exuberance, or crowing with joy, or anything cock-a-hoop, but for a kind of buoyancy. Only a Broadway musical, Cabaret, say, or Chicago, can make me positively exultant. Watching the prancing Freddie Mercury belt out Mama, the Live Aid concert in London that summer evening in 1985, on YouTube, I wasn't there, is electrifyingly beautiful as well. On reflection, when that young Kazakh, Dimash Kudaibergen, hit the high notes on America's Got Talent a year or two ago, I also became instantly tearful, just like one of the judges, Britney Spears, whose name, by the way, is an anagram for Presbyterian, which always cheers me up immensely. My mind was gently ravished by the Kazakh's piercing delicacy. I was left febrile in its wake. It's spine-chilling, this kind of rarefied joy. Even Beethoven rarely transports me to quite those heights. For the most part, however, I simply have a flair, sort of intensely felt contentment. Why should I be ashamed?
Thank you. That's an excellent passage. Journos sort of spend their life interviewing people, and I think what we're simply doing all the time is we want a cheat sheet for how to live your life. That's all we're after. And I'm interested in, what would be on Robert Dessaix's cheat sheet for, to be happy or to live your life? What are some of the elements there?
Now, you mean?
Yes.
Age. Odd enough, I talked about quite a lot in the last book, which was The Pleasures of Leisure. I think that what makes for a good life, and that's what I'm always writing about, it's what the French call a beautiful life, because a good life to the French sounds far too virtuous, and the French, as we know, have no interest whatsoever in virtue. A beautiful life is what they would want, and it's what I would want. It's going to be made up partly each day of doing absolutely nothing at all. Nothing. Sitting, looking, perhaps listening to music, perhaps reading something, but not doing anything, not achieving anything. It's resting after the kill, as animals do. The kill, of course, in my case, happened a long time ago. That was work, that was achieving, that was making the money to live. The second thing, and I think we all have to face this, is nesting. We're going to have to do a bit of nesting. So I've trained myself, particularly since I started thinking about these things for that book, into enjoying nesting, not vacuuming, can't go that far, but to enjoy even washing up if I have to, a bit of cleaning, the maintenance I was talking about before. This is all nesting. It's making the nest comfortable. It's a very human thing. And it's the things that make me feel more deeply human that make me contented. But then it's play. Half the day should be given over to play, should be given over to learning languages or to singing in a choir. I don't sing in a choir, but I wish I did. Into walking, into conversation, as you just said, emailing, telephoning, play. Travel, of course, it used to be. That was my great way of playing. And those of you who've read, those of you present tonight who've read my writing and seen how I travel will know what pleasure it gave me and how I love to do it. That was the great way to play for me. So those three elements should be in a good day. I ask for nothing else. I don't want to achieve anything anymore. Not really. I want to be more consciously and intensely human than I've been perhaps at some times in my life when I've tried to live according to ideologies.
Mm. So when you're writing, Robert, I mean, that's not work to you?
It's funny, isn't it? But I think most artists will say there'll be people here tonight who write or who paint or perhaps design gardens, whatever it might be. We are very lucky, which is why governments don't like us, for example. We are very lucky because our work is very like our way of playing and just being ourselves. It's just a great gift. Not entirely. I mean, writing a book does involve quite a lot of drudgery, actually. It can go on for months. But overall, yes, it's part of playing. Creativity is part of playing. So we don't have usually a master in doing what we do. That's the great freedom. A master who governs our time, who allots time in dollops. We tend not to have that. Oh, freedom is just marvelous. And I'm aware of it. I'm grateful. I don't know if grateful is quite the right word. I'm appreciative.
Mm. Mm. And when you start to write on a subject or a particular point in your book, do you know what you think about that? Do you write your way there?
Well, not exactly, because you see, these are real conversations. They didn't always happen exactly where I've said they happened. And sometimes these are amalgamations of conversations. I mean, the woman that I talked to in Sydney Art Gallery, is a woman I've talked to for, what is it now? It must be almost 40 years, I think, different times. So it's not a single conversation, but we did meet outside the Art Gallery in New South Wales. We did sit and talk. So I really couldn't write about that until we had sat outside the Art Gallery in New South Wales and talked. And that's true of, I think I can say, all the conversations. They are all in some sense real, and they had to happen before I could write it down. And you might have noticed that in the conversations, I'm a bit more, what would you say, shaky in what I think and what I accept. I might say, oh, can that be really true? Is that really what you think? Do I think like that? When it's just me talking, as I do in some chapters, particularly about death, about religion, I can be a bit more shouty, and I don't like that side of myself, which is why I try to minimize it in the book. That is, I can be a little bit more, look, this is the way it is. Let's go, straight to the hunt. Is that what you say? To the chase? This is how it is. Just listen to me now. So there are two kinds of voices, really. And I think any writer will say to you, you discover what you want to say by saying it, actually.
Do you, I mean, for a lot of people in their 40s and 50s, and even 60s, they seem to be robbed of contentment, particularly at the moment, because there's so much in the world they feel they need to be head up about, you need to be angry about, you need to be worried about, every day in the national politics, let alone what's happening in America and other countries. Does that start to fall away?
Well, I think it does, to be quite honest, and it will sound as if I'm uncaring, but I think that, as I've said, your horizons do narrow as you grow older, and you start to focus on one or two things about which you care deeply. 2 or 3 people about whom you care deeply. What matters to me most, I would say, is the environment, what is happening to the natural world, more than, in some ways, human suffering. I just feel it is so much vaster than human suffering. And it's what I think about and write about and try to do something about in a very, very, very small way. But not everybody will make that particular choice. They'll make another choice. It might be to look after homeless children, or it might be eye problems in Bangladesh. I mean, one can never tell another person what to focus on. But I think we start to focus. We become, I think I say in the book, miniaturists. You sort of go down in and focus on something. And Donald Trump, I've seen other Donald Trumps, you see, really. I mean, I was born in the Second World War.
Mm.
Hitler was still alive. I don't remember him personally, but if you can see what I mean,
Yeah.
Donald Trump is a passing phenomenon. And I'm amazed at how much attention he's getting. He is really not the important thing. What does bother me a little bit, though, as I might have hinted, is the way some are saying in our society now, some quite well-known people, that old people's lives are not worth as much as young people's lives, that if choices have to be made, old people may have to be sacrificed. I think that the phrase that Tony Abbott used was, nature may have to take its course. Well, I want to live in a world where we all want to help those around us live for as long as they wish to live.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's the world I want to live in. Whether you're 101 or 35, I want you to live as long as you want to live, living well. I want to do what I can to help you and everyone in my society live into a good old age. That's the sort of society I want to live in. I don't want to ask whether at 84 you're worth keeping alive. I think it's a stupid question. I think it's an ethically barren question. It means nothing.
Well, I think then there's the next question comes, which is, oh, well, who else? What group? Other group is not worth keeping alive. It's a...
Well, we know what the answer to that would be. It's the answer that Hitler came up with, I suppose. It's people in wheelchairs, it's people who are blind.
Mm. Mm. What are we, do you think as a society we are we afraid of death, or in actual fact, when you drilled down to it, did you find we were afraid of what came before death?
People ignore death because now I think a minority of the population has any kind of really properly formulated religious notion of what an afterlife looks like. In fact, historically, for about 500 years now, fewer and fewer people in Western society have had any real notion of what an afterlife might look like. Giotto in his chapel painted it, but most of us don't. I found that most people simply don't want to talk about it. Some of the people who've interviewed me, men and women, have said they simply don't want to talk about that. They don't want to talk about old people's homes. They don't want to talk about death. They particularly don't want to talk about their own death. What we don't mind doing is watching mass slaughter on television. That's somebody else. There is no sort of metaphysical deliberation that's going to occur around that kind of death. We don't even mind seeing on the news people being shot to death or falling out of buildings. We don't want to consider our death, our children's death, the death of our parents. That is too hard for us. We don't know how to say goodbye. So people come up with these ludicrous statements about Vale John Smith or R.I.P. Mary Mulligan. Totally meaningless phrases. They mean zero. The imagination fails us. What I'm saying in this book, although many will not want to go along with me, but I hope they won't feel that I'm in any way coercing them to, is that nothing happens. I've been dead twice. Nothing happens. There is nothing there. And knowing that, I feel immensely relieved. It gives me a sort of freedom, and all those I know who have faced this say the same thing. It gives me a freedom that the believers I know don't seem to quite have. It's the believers I know who seem more anxious than we are. They're anxious about the unknown. For me, there is no unknown. This is life. This is it. I don't have to worry about anything but this. Of course, one is anxious about the undoing. One is anxious about the falling apart. But even then, there's not very much that you can do really, except, well, I suppose, do what you can to stay limber. I have very little faith, as you'll have noticed in the book, about doing yoga or jogging or, Tibetan drumming or...
How do you stay limber, Robert?
Pardon?
How do you stay limber, I dare ask?
Do you? Nobody ever asks. I go to Pilates once a week, which is not, of course, about any philosophy at all. It's simply about staying limber. It's about your joints and about balance. The big problem is balance. And as a number of people here tonight will know, that's the thing we really have to work on. Balance, not falling over. And that's why at the heart of this book, there is a woman falling over. It's Rita, my partner's mother. And the first sentence that came to me was, Rita has fallen over again today. I wrote that down at least 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago, when she indeed fell down again for the last time that day. We do not want to fall down.
Tell me, I was listening to a conversation from a very long time ago that you had with Philip Adams on Radio National, and it was about public intellectuals and how they were, important and used, and we needed them for the national conversations, for taking our hand and taking us through difficult, uncomfortable, big issues, teasing them apart, not necessarily even agreeing, but having these conversations. And that just seemed a world away from where we are today in Australia in having some sort of national conversations, whether it be about our colonial past, whether it be about climate change, it doesn't really matter. Though, who leads those conversations now in Australia? And at the same time, I think, there's with our universities, there's a funding imbalance now on degrees like the arts and humanities. So is that an attack on the public intellectual?
I don't suppose that's the phrase that those in power would use, but of course it is, and it's an attack on the inner life, which makes life worth living. It's all very well to have plumbers and electricians and beautifully engineered roads and people who know how to fire guns and build submarines. I'm not arguing against any of that. Well, I am actually, but in general, I'm not arguing against needing all those things. Of course, we need a physical universe that makes life easier and safer for us. I do understand that. But there has to be a reason for staying alive. And I think what we've forgotten in this rush for jobs, is that there's no point in staying alive if there's nothing inside, if there's just emptiness inside. None at all. The only reason for staying alive is for performing the beauty within us and enjoying it in others and reciprocating it. That's the only reason. And if you can't study philosophy, if you can't study history, if you can't study the humanities, you're going to forget that basic point. I once made that point in a speech at a university in Perth, Edith Cowan University, I think it is, at an award-giving ceremony. What do you call that? Where all the students come and get their degrees. Yes. And I made that point. And the Vice-Chancellor was so horrified that when I finished, he got up and said, I think what Dr. Say meant to say was, and then he simply read the same old line, the line that wasn't mine at all, about the need for degrees in the sorts of things that the government wants us to provide more and more of. That's not my point. Those things should be. People should have a chance to learn about the intellectual life, about the ideas, about history, about other societies, about religion, of course, about music, especially music, about all the things that make life worth living.
That's right. You had a beautiful phrase in the book where you talked about a layered life.
Yes.
And all those things would be a part of that. Yeah.
All those things are a part of that. And my father, for example, my adoptive father, who had really no education at all, he left school at the age of 12. He was born in the 1880s. He was born a long, long time ago in a totally different world from, obviously, anyone here. He had layers. He had layers. He, for example, had a love of French and learning French and teaching me French, of travel, of listening to the news, trying to understand the societies of the 1950s that were pretty much at war with each other in the Cold War that existed then, trying to follow my thought processes in the way that I was changing. He had a big, well, one would have said soul. What would I say? Heart, a big heart. And I do love the word heart, because I think that heart includes both a sense of feelings, that life of feelings that we all have, whoever we are, but with some ideas and intellectual content at all. It's where the two worlds meet, the world of thinking logically and of feeling meet. In English, we call it the heart. The Indonesians, for some reason, call it the liver, which is always terribly disconcerting when people praise you for your beautiful liver or your kind liver.
But the thing is, when you're in conversation with a person like that, or you read a book that is like that, it is utterly enriching.
Well, I hope. I read quite a lot. I don't read very easily at the moment, but I do read quite a lot because I want to have my socks knocked off. I want to be not just contented, but happy, you see. I want to be exultant. I want to be joyful. I want to find someone who's going to grab me by the collar and say wonderful things to me that I hadn't expected them to say. As you grow older, it gets harder and harder because, after all, by my age, you've heard pretty much everything, I have to say. But it does happen. And the best at it, from my point of view, it won't be from the point of view of everyone here tonight, the Indians are very good at it, and the Irish are very good at it. Also, the Scots. It's odd. It's people who come from a background where English wasn't actually the first language. Standard English was not the first language. It is perhaps their first language. They don't speak Gaelic or they don't speak Hindi particularly well. I know plenty of Indians who speak really virtually nothing but English, but it is English of a different kind, of a more creative kind, of a freer kind than I can ever speak. I can read Indian writers and Irish writers, like Sebastian Barry, for example, James Joyce, naturally, who have a freedom with English that I can only dream of. I mean, it is the most exciting thing. And so I read. I don't find it in Australia much.
No, thank you for your enriching writing, Robert. It's always, I always feel as if it's a deep breath. There's an opening up. I'm more interested once I've read one of your books. So thank you very much.
Oh, it's a great pleasure. But of course, it's not on the same level as the sort of people I've been talking about, the Vikram Sets and the James Joyces, naturally. It's just not. But there you go. I do what I can. I try to let people come inside me and converse with me.
I do have some questions now, and that's probably a good place to mention that you have indeed, Robert, knocked many people's socks off with your writing and also with your conversation tonight. I'm just going to read a statement from Janet because I think it sums up a lot of the statements that we've got coming through, which is, I really value the clear, insightful awareness of this state of being that Robert has bravely explored and which is almost never honestly and openly contemplated. Preparing for this condition has now some real grounded practice to try out for ourselves and to tell others. Thank you, honest, ethical, no bells or whistles, just dancing.
Thank you.
So that is a comment which really sums up quite a few messages that I'm getting through here. But we do have some questions as well. And here's a question from Poppy, who misses you on ABCRN, the books and writing, and as we all do. Poppy says, Helen Garner has released 2 volumes of her diaries. Do you diarise? And if so, will you publish?
Certainly not. No, I won't. The only time I keep a diary is when I travel, because when I'm at home, it seems to me I have such cliched thoughts. When I'm at home, I think home thoughts, and I think about whether I should take the dog out now. Nice thoughts, but they're home thoughts. They're in a very ordinary kind of English. As soon as I find myself somewhere totally foreign, even perhaps a little hostile to who I am, then interesting things start to happen. So I write them down. And I have my travel diaries going back, goodness me, 40 years, I suppose. Well, going back to the 1970s, actually. I don't think I should ever publish them, but perhaps someone will take them from me, some library, and perhaps someone interested in what I've written at some point will quote from them. I mean, I have no insights that anyone in this room has not had. That's not my contribution, to have insights no one's ever had. I think I'm good at language. It's the only thing I am good at, really. I think I've found good words for things that the people here tonight have thought to themselves or have thought about thinking to themselves. I think that's what I do. So my diaries will not be full of wise sentences necessarily, but they will prompt people to say to themselves, exactly, that's the thing.
Okay, so I've got another question here from Haley, who asks, would you attribute the inner freedom you describe more to the many years of life experience or to the proximity to death?
You may not like my answer to this. I attribute it to my teacher at primary school, not at high school, but at primary school. Two other women in my book went to the same primary school, I have to say, in the lower North Shore of Sydney. It was primary school where you had one teacher for 2 years that said to me, you can be anything you want. You don't have to listen to your parents, anything you want. You can be an artist, you can be a bus driver, you can play football, you can play cricket, you can dance, you can play the flute, you can write plays, you can act, you can paint, you can do anything you want. It was magic. I was transformed by primary school. High school, they just taught us things. Well, I mean, you know, I could have taught myself, really. It's just that I made some friends at high school, I suppose. I didn't get the same thing out of high school. Information has never been my strong point. I'm not really very interested in information. I'm interested in beauty and in how to get it. So it was primary school, and also, of course, being adopted. Being adopted is just the most fabulous freedom, because your parents think you are a treasure, and they love you to bits, and they love you in a very freeing way, because you'll never be like Uncle Henry, because you're not related to Uncle Henry, and you don't have to go into the timber business because you actually aren't part of the family. You're just loved. That's it. So I think the freedom that comes from being adopted is wonderful. And nowadays, I think rarer and rarer, probably. I'm not sure that so many children are being adopted, are they? As once were. I mean, I was adopted because I was illegitimate, and that was impossible. And so I had to be adopted. I was also an only child, and that, I think, perhaps encourages a life of the imagination, because you're alone so much of the time. Both my parents worked. I was alone after school. So what do? You talk to yourself aloud. You invent worlds. You argue with yourself. You, well, dream. You pretend to be things you're not.
Interesting.
I'm lucky, aren't I? I mean, I'm lucky. I'm lucky.
Very interesting. There's a question here from Linda, which and she asks whether you think the ages or the stages of life affect how you'll be as a leader. So she's specifically talking about Biden and Trump, but you know, what if there were candidates who are in their 40s or 50s? Do you think the stages of life of a leader is going to change things for that country?
I'm disappointed, I suppose, that the American election is offering men of that particular nation and nobody else to the American electorate. But of course, at the same time, I hesitate to use that denigrating phrase that's tossed about with gay abandon these days, actually, even on the ABC, even in good newspapers like The Guardian, old white men. Well, I'm old, I'm white, and I'm a man, and I can't do anything about it. And I don't quite like being wrapped up and thrown away, if you know what I mean. Yes, they are old white men, but I don't think that's probably exactly what I don't like about them. I suppose what I don't like about them is their mediocrity. I don't really think it matters what age the American president is. I don't think there's any great advantage in being 42 or 56 or 63. It's the mediocrity of these two particular obscenely wealthy people.
Mm. I've got a question here about why we don't speak about death in our culture. Do you have any thoughts about that, and whether we should do more speaking and thinking about end of life?
Well, of course, I think we should, which is partly why I've spoken about it here. It's difficult because in our sort of society, Australian society, as opposed to Javanese society, there is no consensus about death and what it means and about what happens next. And one can easily tread on other people's corns in talking about it. When I talk about it here, I try to talk about it in a way that won't offend those who see these things very differently. Christians, for example, or believers in any particular religion, it doesn't matter very much, even Buddhists. I am very un-Islamic, un-Christian, un-Buddhist, and I make that fairly clear. But in some societies, such as Java, which I've come to know fairly well for a foreigner, most people agree, probably 90% of the population, if not 100%, more or less agree on how you can talk about these things. There is a language, there is a narrative. We don't have that anymore. And so we're embarrassed. I don't think we feel forbidden. We're embarrassed. People look away, people use cliches, they start telling jokes inappropriately. We don't know what to do with ourselves. I think the best way, of course, is to ask yourself very honestly, why do I believe there's an afterlife? Is there any evidence that is persuasive for me? If there is for you, then you are a very fortunate person in some ways. You should go with that. I think for, well, particularly Tasmanians, probably for half the population now, there is no persuasive evidence, and the number is growing. Which doesn't mean that I don't enjoy visiting churches and listening to church music or looking at stained glass windows. Of course I do. And I am deeply Christian in all sorts of ways that I have no control over because I was brought up in a Christian society. I have Christian values. I'm a deeply un-Islamic person.
That's fantastic. That's a great answer. There's a question here from Danny about whether you ever met your birth mother, and perhaps you need to point him to one of your previous books.
I did write my first book about it, actually, Danny. It was called A Mother's Disgrace. Yes, I did meet her. I was in my mid-40s, I think. And the thing about it was, I didn't grow to love her, and I don't think she grew to love me. I liked her. I mean, there is a bond. It's a good bond, and therefore I developed a fondness. And she died just very few years after I met her. She was 17 when she came back to me. But I can't say I loved her. Love is a word I try to use really rather sparingly. I think it's such an important concept. I don't want to just use it because I feel socially obliged to. And I didn't love her. And she said to me near her death, just before her death, she said, I can't approve of you. This is not in the book. I don't think it's in the book. I can't approve of you because you're gay. And if I'd kept you, I could have saved you from that. Now, she meant it kindly. She didn't mean to be cruel. I was not wounded. I'm not one of those people who is always taking offense and feeling wounded. You've got to accept offense, I think. I was not offended, but I did say to her, my adoptive parents were wonderful. I'm happy that it was these two people who adopted me, and I'm happy being gay. I'm not saying it's better than that. I'm happy. It works for me. I have been married, of course. I was married for quite a long time to a woman, as one's got to add these days. But I'm happy being gay. It's okay. I don't wave flags, but it works.
Fantastic. Look, it has been an absolute delight listening to you tonight, Robert Dessaix and Kathleen. The questions were really insightful and fantastic.
Weren't they? They were really insightful, and thank you for being here, everybody, at this sort of rather peculiar hour on a Wednesday evening. Thank you.
It's been an absolute joy, as Brendan from the audience has said. We really look forward to reading your book, and do, if you're in the audience tonight and listening, do keep your eye out, go to our cart, do that event as a keyword to get 10% off, or if you're in Melbourne and still in the very, very, very long lockdown that they have been experiencing, please support your local bookshop down there and purchase Robert's book from them, because I know that they will be struggling in this time. It has been a delight and a pleasure, and I look forward to aging well with you and your book, Robert. Thank you very, very much.
Thanks, Chrissy. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you, Kathleen. I'm grateful.
Great. See you later, everyone. Bye.